if you've been following through all the videos, then you'll know that there are two different quilts that are ongoing. The small block quilt, which was just finished, and now this one here, the large block quilt that I am getting ready to piece. With this quilt, I'm going to do kind of a piecing method for once the blocks are all formed that's just a little bit different in putting this one together. There's not really any one way to put something together for the most part, so you can do something that kind of makes sense the most for yourself. And for me with this quilt, because of the way it's kind of constructed, working on quadrants and then putting those 4 quadrants together at the end is going to be part of that method. So let's talk about the piecing strategies first. With the exception of the corner blocks in my quilt, the rest of them are all going to be strip piece sets of 3. So my first thing will be to strip piece everything that I need. I've got my main blocks that are 3s before they're cut, and then there's also a couple of parts on the corner blocks that are going to be strip pieced as well. So the first step for this whole thing is going to be strip piecing everything that needs to be pieced together, and then from there I'll be subcutting everything that needs to be subcut. I have everything now strip pieced, and this is the beauty of the strip piecing. I am like easily half done this quilt now. So my we've got a couple different block types in here, and I've got the ones that are kind of rectangular and 3 different colors going across, and then I have each of these corner blocks. So as I was strip piecing, the ones from my corner blocks that need to be cut into a couple of different lengths are going to be a couple parts there, and then I have these here that need to be added on, and that will complete the rest, that last bit of each of those corner blocks. So with this and that corner block, there is only 1, 2, there are only 3 seams left to put into those, and I'll work through those in a chain piecing method, so they will be very quick as well. And then the other ones, they're done. Everything just needs to be pressed. These just need to be cut, but the rest of those blocks are already done. And for my big ones here in the center, those squares are already cut out and will be pieced together as well. I have finished pressing out all my pieces, and the first ones that I am going to cut of my strip piecing are the ones that were done in pairs. And these pairs are going to be cut into 2 different sizes for my quilt, and these will go into creating that corner block. So I need 3.5 inch cuts, and I need some 6.5 inch cuts. So the for the green one, because I only need a total of 4 corner pieces, they will share out of here. But my other ones, because I have a total of 8 corner pieces, I have a few more that I'll need to cut from them. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out these, and then we will be meeting back at the sewing machine for me to piece everything together. I have all my strip sets cut up into the sizes that I need to create my corner block. I am going to also, as I get ready to sew these, take a look at which colors are going to be touching and not touching. And as I sew one strip set cut to the next one to create kind of the inside or first 2/3 of that block, my lighter colors will be touching, but my dark colors are going to be separated at all times. So even though before I sew it, I will make sure that I've flipped everything over and that it is lined up to go through this sewing machine correctly. But it is good to know how your colors are going to work together as you're sewing them, so that way if something gets turned around on you between lining them up and getting them ready here and putting it through the sewing machine, hopefully then you can catch that before you finish or even start that seam. I am going to do these first once kind of in a chain piecing method. Once kind of that 2/3 block is created, then I will be able to attach my last long strip. And that last long strip has to be last, because right now it's going to appear kind of short compared to these two pieces here. And when I join them, I'm going to lose that 1/4 inch on each side for a seam allowance along here. And that will bring these two pieces, once they're joined, to the same size as this final length here. Once I'm done piecing the blocks together, then I will press everything and I'll be ready to move on to assembling each quadrant of my quilt, and then those quadrants will come together to form the final quilt. My corner blocks are done and pressed, and they are ready to go for the next stage of this quilt. So all my block piecing is finished at this stage, and it is now moving into assembling those blocks into the bigger part of that quilt. So looking at my quilt layout on graph paper, I can see that I can build each of these colors as its own quadrant. And my green blocks are going to get built into each part where it goes within the color section. So for this one, because I've decided that I want my large blocks to be symmetrical, I am going to do a chain piecing method where I place kind of color A and B together, and then color C is going to pair up with one of my corner blocks here. And once I have those kind of stitched basically on this line and then this line here, I am going to move them together and stitch along here. So what that does then is it gives me space to add on these two, I guess, rail fence type blocks, but to do them in one piece instead of cutting out one block and then adding in another block. And I will add in this side and this side first, and that gives me the complete width across for each quadrant. So then I can go ahead and add my two corners onto another one. I will have to get this block down to 9.5 because it pairs up with a 9.5 green block. But then I'll be able to piece that whole line up together as well and attach them into this kind of center thing. And then that whole quadrant will be complete. As I go through the process, I will probably just chain piece everything for each of those 4 quadrants, just because it's a little bit quicker and more efficient. And I'll do, maybe the 2 blues together and then the purples together, or the pinks together. while I'm doing that chain piecing method. So I'll make sure to go slowly through kind of that first set for you, but once I've kind of got going on stuff, then I will make sure to speed up the video. And next I need to decide on my fabrics and where I'm going to place them within my quadrant block. So I have these two are pretty bright and this one is a lot darker. And I've decided that I would like to have this darker one right here in the corner, just because then it splits up these two that are a little bit brighter. They're not actually going to be touching each other at that point. So I know that I'm going to be attaching a dark one to one of my lighter ones, and then one of my other lighter ones back into my green square here. So the next thing I'm going to do is just kind of pair everything up so it's fast for me to put everything through and chain piece it on my sewing machine. So these are pressed, and I knew that as I was going through them, sewing them, that I wanted to press over towards, I guess, the dark side. This block is darker and happens to be on the opposite corner of this one, and this green is a little bit darker. And so I counted this block here as a dark block. So it really, all that mostly did for me was make sure that my seams were pressed out in opposite directions. So when I go to pin these seams here, so I can sew along this side and connect my 4 pieces for the center, the seams are going to nest together quite comfortably. It makes it easier to pin, and it helps keep everything just laying flat as I put it through the sewing machine. I have the inside of each of my kind of interlocking squares done, and these are all symmetrical, so whichever one it's landing in, it will either be this way, another one will get a switch over to this orientation, and the other ones will be in these orientations. So that is, when you're working on something, always something to keep in mind is when you're moving things around, you know, they might look different in your layout. However, if they are really just the same thing but a turned orientation, then it makes it a lot easier when you are piecing your blocks together, because you can sew everything through the machine in one direction and then rotate your blocks afterwards for that orientation that you'll need. So I am going to do a measurement check on these before I go and add the rest of my pieces. So the next step is to start adding in the outer parts of each of my quadrants here. So one positive with these is that they are all symmetrical. I can cut everything out the same way, I can line everything up the same way and sew it through the same way, anytime that there's an opportunity for batch piecing, I will definitely go with that. So part of my edges I have on my quilt drawing, they are divided up into two 9.5-inch cut or unfinished blocks, or 9 finished. But with my, because some of them are coming in along the side here and here as full length or on each of these sides, and then the top as a full width across, I don't need to cut two 9.5-inch blocks only to sew it back together again where everything's going to line up. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I am going to cut for the entire width of this, and my block at this point here is 18.5 inches unfinished. So just a quick review of finished versus unfinished. The unfinished, there's a raw edge exposed somewhere. Finished, all 4 sides have been pieced in together. And even on my smaller pieced block, I still have unfinished edges. They all come across, down and end out on some edge of that quilt. So even though these two here and these ones are all sewn in on 3 sides, it's still unfinished, but they're not that 1/2 inch anymore. They are still just a 1/4 inch now bigger than it was previously. So the other way of counting this and helping to keep track is still to continue to think of these blocks in terms of finished, adding them together, and then to get your fuller large block size, and then you just reapply your add that 1/2 inch rule. And so each of my blocks, because they're supposed to be done at 9 inches, that adds up to 18, so 18 inches square. However, I have exposed edges on all sides, and I apply my 1/2 inch rule to that, and I have an 18.5 unfinished block at this stage. So my green ones, because of where they go, and it's a smaller interlocking block, I do need to cut 9.5-inch blocks for all of my green ones. But for the pink and blue parts, 3 of them, or well, 6 actually altogether, are going to be cut at 18.5 inches, and 2 of them are going to be cut at 9.5 inches. And that's just because they fit in where my green block is creating that weave illusion. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to batch cut everything, get everything lined up with what I need for this next stage. I won't need all of my batch cut pieces at the beginning, because some of them will have to be attached to other corner pieces before I can attach them onto here. With these strip sets, I'm going to need to use 2 rulers to help me get the measurements that I need and to make my cut. So the first stage here is, of course, going to be cutting off the selvage edges. And my wider length that I need, that 18.5 inches, I do not have 18.5 inches on my square ruler. I do here. However, this ruler is not long enough to make my entire cut this way. So I'm going to use kind of a combination of the two. One ruler is actually just going to give me that longer cutting edge that I need, and the other one will be doing the measuring. So just to kind of start with, I'm going to cut the selvage off. Make sure everything's lined up. And I like to stick pretty close to it. I have kind of come to this point where, you know, if I don't completely cut off 100% of that edge, but there's still just a tiny bit left, that extra tiny bit, it gets eaten up within your seam allowance. So it won't be visible through the top of your quilt. And sometimes doing so, especially if you think that you're going to be really close for the amount of fabric that you have and what you need to cut out of it, sometimes just having an extra little 1/4 inch is can be really important. So 18.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is find where that is on my ruler here, and I'm going to make sure that my seams are lined up here through the center, and I don't need to worry about how much is on the top or the bottom. That bit is completely irrelevant. The only thing I'm watching for is my 18.5-inch line right along this edge here. And then I am going to, oh, and I do want to make sure that all of this is nice and straight. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my other bigger ruler where I have enough room on both sides to make that cut. Kind of line that up as well and make sure that everything's just butted together here. This one is giving me the measurement. This one, once I move this ruler out of the way, then I'll be able to cut along here. So I'm continuing to check that I'm satisfied with how straight everything is. And I do want to make sure that my straight lines and cuts are going with what I see here. So sometimes, as tempting as it might be to straighten something out underneath this ruler, I do not want to do that because it can distort my cut here. There we go. I am satisfied with that. So this one will just slide out of the way and cut. So now I have my 18.5-inch length here for one side, and just grabbed a block here so we can start to see how this is going to form together. There we go. So one will come on this side, one will come on the other side, one will come along the top. And then I've got my light and dark pink corner pieces that are going to come around here. And for the one on the bottom, I'm going to need a green one of these that will come down this direction. And then the other one will be orientated to go this direction to kind of carry around that interlocking block look. So I am going to go ahead and cut more of these. For the ones that are 9.5 inches, I don't need to use this ruler at all because I have a 9.5-inch width on my larger square ruler, and it will be able to fit underneath this. So if you've got a couple rulers, but one is too narrow to get the full cut this way, but long enough, and you've got another ruler that is the right direction in another way, then using the two rulers together, you can get your measurement that you need and have the other side for that cutting edge. So I will do this just one more time. And you want to check that you're putting your ruler on in the correct direction, because if I go this way and I find 18.5, I'm going to end up with this much of a cut instead of this much of a cut. So do double check that orientation of your ruler so that way you're not going in the wrong way. So I'm going to get everything lined up again, looking for the 18.5-inch line and making sure that my seams are all lined up underneath one of these lines. And because fabric has a little bit of give to it, sometimes it's not going to be completely exact, and sometimes seams get a little bit wonky while you're sewing them. So at a certain point you need to just kind of decide where lines are going to meet, and then after that you might have to cut a little bit big just so you can trim something else down to make it a better fit. So for this one, I'm seeing that I'm probably going to need to come back and take another little trim off this edge over here. My 18.5 inch line here on the kind of shorter end of it, but I know that it's going to be square underneath these two lines here because my seam is lining up with two of my lines. So that's sort of that first thing that I'm looking for when I go to cut these, is the kind of the longest, straightest line that I have access to. And that's all looking good. So now I'm going to make my last cut. One more 18.5 inch piece there. And this ball I'll put into a scrap bin because there is enough usable fabric. I do have at least, I have about 6 inches here that I can use from these. So I don't know what this will get used for, but it will probably be cut up into some other strips for something, or if I really wanted to take it apart, I could take it apart. But there'll be some sort of kind of scrappy quilt where all these odds and ends will end up being used. And I've got one more cutting tip. So sometimes you've got, out of one larger piece of fabric and you're making multiple sizes of cuts, it can be a really good idea to make sure that the ones that are sort of the odd ones out get done first. So in my case, I only need 2 9.5 inch cuts out of these blocks. And if I forget, I cannot get 2 9.5 inch cuts out of an 18.5 inch piece. They're both going to be 1/4 inch short. So before I get to cutting happy and totally forget about those, I am going to cut those next. And again, that first step, make sure I am taking care of my selvage ends. And then I'm going to do those 2 9.5 inch cuts. So, and yeah, I guess kind of one other thing too, when you go to use 2 rulers to help with your measurements, you don't need to turn your fabric. So whatever side that you've squared up, you're going to use your measuring ruler from that side, because when you go to place your ruler that's just for the straight line, you are already going to be lined up to take that cut with your right hand, or if you're left-handed, it would be the opposite. But if you are using a ruler that is large enough to make those cuts, you will need to turn your cut end around, so that way you are measuring from the other side. So double checking that I have 9.5 inches. That's very important. Otherwise, I will be making an additional strip set. If I cut it too short and have to cut again, I don't have that much extra fabric. If I cut too big, I have enough fabric left that I could, I guess, ultimately spare an inch. And it looks like, for whatever reason, things are a little bit wonky here on my edge. So not a big deal. But if they are, I want to make sure that I'm satisfied with where my 9.5 inch line goes. And whatever is extra and off to the side, I can trim that back afterwards. When I went to cut off the selvage edge, I noticed that I had definitely kind of tapered in with my stitches towards the end, so that would definitely play a factor. But now I'm just going to clean up that end. So checking that everything's kind of lined up and straight where I had my cuts going along before. 9.5 inches. And just one more. So not much to clean off, but it does keep things nice and square for the next part. So I have one more of these to do, and then I will have cut out my 2 smaller squares that I need, and then I'll be able to go on to my larger 18.5-inch cuts. All my longer and my shorter blocks are cut, and I'm ready to move into the stage of kind of pairing everything up.